I never thought I'd be standing here alone watching the life we built crumble beneath my feet. Daniel and I were supposed to be forever. 3 years of love, a home filled with memories and dreams that stretched into our future. Then Emma reappeared in his life. His high school sweetheart, the one who got away. I can still feel the silence hanging in our apartment as he packed his things, his words cutting through me like glass. I'm sorry, Rachel. Some bonds can't be broken. 2 weeks later, their engagement announcement appeared on social media. I deleted every trace of him from my life, determined to move forward. Until this morning, when 2 pink lines appeared on the test. Now, I'm standing outside our favourite cafe, watching him laugh with her through the window, my hand instinctively touching my stomach. He's marrying her in 3 months. He has no idea I'm carrying his child, and I have no idea how to tell him. The life I thought we would build together is shattered, yet something new grows inside me, a connection that can never be severed, a truth that will eventually come to light. When it does, all 3 of our lives will be forever changed. When I first met Daniel at a mutual friend's housewarming party, I never imagined he would become the centre of my world. He was standing by the kitchen counter, mixing drinks and telling stories that had everyone laughing. His eyes found mine across the room, and something shifted in the air between us. It wasn't love at first sight. I don't believe in that kind of fairy tale, but there was an undeniable pull, a curiosity that made me gravitate toward him. You must be Rachel, he said, handing me a carefully crafted cocktail. Mark's told me all about you. I raised an eyebrow, taking the drink. All good things, I hope. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made them crinkle at the corners. Depends on your definition of good. That night, we talked for hours, long after most of the guests had left. Daniel had this way of listening, like you were the only person in the room, like every word you said mattered. By the time he asked for my number, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Our relationship bloomed slowly, deliberately. First, coffee dates turned into dinner dates. Movie nights evolved into weekend getaways. Before I knew it, we were discussing moving in together, mapping out a future that seemed so certain, so solid. Daniel was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Thoughtful, ambitious, kind, with just enough stubbornness to keep things interesting. When we found our apartment, a cosy 2-bedroom with large windows that flooded the space with morning light, it felt like the beginning of something permanent. We spent weeks painting walls, assembling furniture, and transforming the empty rooms into a home. Daniel insisted on carrying me over the threshold the day we officially moved in, both of us laughing as he nearly knocked my head on the doorframe. Practice for the real thing, he'd said with a wink, and my heart soared at the implication. For almost 3 years, we built a life together. We had our routines, Sunday morning brunches where Daniel made his famous French toast, evening walks in the park near our place, holiday traditions that blended both our families. We had our struggles too. Disagreements about finances, career decisions, the normal friction of 2 lives intertwining. But we always found our way back to each other, stronger for having weathered the storm together. I thought I knew everything about Daniel, his childhood dreams, his deepest fears, the way he hummed unconsciously while cooking. But there was one chapter of his life he rarely discussed in detail. Emma. I knew she existed. I knew they had dated throughout high school and into their first year of college before parting ways when she transferred to a school across the country. I knew from the wistful tone he used when her name occasionally came up that their breakup hadn't been born from falling out of love, but from circumstance and timing. First love is different, he told me once, late at night when we were sharing pieces of our past. It's not better or more real than what comes after, just different, more consuming because you don't know enough to protect yourself. I didn't feel threatened by this ghost from his past. Emma was living in California, married according to social media, while we were building our lives together in Chicago. She was a memory, nothing more. Until 6 months ago, when she wasn't just a memory anymore. It started innocently enough. Emma had moved back to Chicago after a divorce, reconnecting with old friends, including Daniel's best friend from high school. They ran into each other at a reunion gathering Daniel had initially planned to skip before changing his mind at the last minute. "You'll never guess who was there," he said when he came home that night, his energy different, charged with something I couldn't identify. "Who?" I asked, looking up from my book. "Emma, she's back in Chicago, divorced about a year ago." He tried to sound casual, but there was an undercurrent in his voice that made my stomach tighten. "That's unexpected," I managed. "How is she?" "Good. Different, but the same, you know." He laughed at himself. "That doesn't make sense, does it?" "It makes perfect sense," I said quietly, because it did. I understood exactly what he meant, and that understanding sent a chill through me. I told myself I was being paranoid when Daniel mentioned running into her again at a coffee shop near his office. I convinced myself it was innocent when they connected on social media and began commenting on each other's posts. I believed him when he said their occasional lunches were just old friends catching up. But as weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the changes. Daniel was more distracted, checking his phone more frequently, laughing at messages I wasn't privy to. He started coming home later, citing work projects or drinks with colleagues. The apartment that had once felt like our sanctuary began to feel like a stage where we were both performing the roles of a happy couple. I confronted him one night after he cancelled our dinner plans at the last minute. "Is there something going on with Emma?" He looked startled, then defensive. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean, Daniel. You've been different since she came back. I'm not stupid." "Nothing's going on," he insisted, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "We're just friends. She's going through a tough time with the divorce, and I'm helping her adjust to being back in Chicago." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the distance between us continued to grow, a canyon forming where our intimacy once lived. Daniel started spending entire weekends helping Emma move or showing her around the new parts of the city. When he was home, he wasn't really present, his mind clearly elsewhere. The night everything fell apart started like any other. I was cooking dinner, music playing softly in the background, trying to ignore the fact that Daniel was late again. When I heard his key in the lock, I turned with a smile that quickly faded when I saw his expression. He looked tormented but resolute, like someone who had fought a long internal battle and finally surrendered. "We need to talk," he said, the 4 words no one ever wants to hear. I turned off the stove and faced him, my hands trembling slightly. "About Emma?" He nodded, looking both relieved and pained that I had said her name first. "Rachel, I've been trying to fight this. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that." "Fight what, exactly?" My voice sounded hollow, detached, as if it belonged to someone else. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "When Emma and I broke up, it wasn't because we stopped loving each other. It was because we were too young and life pulled us in different directions. I thought I'd moved on. I had moved on. And then, with you, I found something real and beautiful, something I never wanted to lose." "But," I prompted, the word hanging between us like an axe. "But seeing her again, it's like all those years in between disappeared. The connection we had, it never really went away." He looked at me pleadingly. "I didn't plan this. I tried to ignore it, to focus on us, on everything we've built together. Yet, here we are," I said, my voice finally breaking. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." His eyes glistened with tears. "I love you, I do. But with Emma, some bonds can't be broken. I think a part of me has been waiting for her all this time without even realizing it. The next few hours blurred together as Daniel packed some essential belongings. We agreed he would come back for the rest when I was at work, sparing us both the pain of watching our life together being dismantled piece by piece. There were tears, recriminations, moments of desperate bargaining, but underneath it all was the horrible certainty that nothing I said would change his mind. When the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor and let grief wash over me in waves so intense I thought they might drown me. The days that followed were a nightmare of practical matters disguising emotional devastation. We had to decide who would keep the apartment, me, how to divide our shared possessions, painfully, what to tell our friends and families, the truth eventually. Daniel was apologetic, even kind in his way, but also eager to move forward with her. 2 weeks after he walked out, the engagement announcement appeared on social media. I stared at my phone screen in disbelief, at their beaming faces and the vintage diamond ring that had probably belonged to her grandmother. The caption read, "When you find your way back to your first love, you don't wait to make it forever." Second chance at forever. The betrayal cut deep. Not just the relationship with Emma, which had clearly progressed far beyond friendship long before our breakup, but the speed with which he had committed to her. 3 years with me, and he had always deflected marriage conversations with someday and when the time is right. 2 weeks with her and he was shopping for rings. I deleted my social media accounts that night. I couldn't bear to see their happiness paraded in front of me, couldn't stomach the sympathetic messages from friends who had already heard the news. I threw myself into work, took up running until my lungs burned and my legs ached, rearranged the apartment to erase any trace of Daniel's presence. I was determined to move forward, to not let this break me. And I was succeeding in my way. The pain didn't disappear, but it became manageable. I established new routines, reconnected with friends I had neglected during my relationship, even went on a date that was pleasant, if not particularly exciting. I was rebuilding, one day at a time, until this morning. I had been feeling off for a couple of weeks, tired, nauseous in the mornings, emotional in a way that seemed disproportionate even considering the circumstances. I blamed stress, the aftermath of heartbreak, too much coffee, and too little sleep. But when I realised my period was late, very late, a different possibility crept into my mind. The pregnancy test sat on my bathroom counter for 3 days before I found the courage to use it. I told myself it was almost certainly negative, that my body was just reacting to the emotional trauma of the breakup. When 2 pink lines appeared clear as day, I sat on the edge of the bathtub for nearly an hour, trying to process what this meant. A baby. Daniel's baby. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past year, we had talked casually about starting a family soon, with Daniel always being the one to suggest waiting a bit longer. Now here I was, pregnant with his child, while he planned a wedding to another woman. I hadn't meant to end up outside the cafe where Daniel and I had our first date, the same cafe where I now knew he and Emma met regularly. It was as if my feet had carried me there without conscious direction. Through the window, I could see them sitting at a corner table, the table that had once been ours. Emma was showing him something on her phone, probably wedding details, and Daniel was looking at her with the kind of devotion that had once been reserved for me. My hand moved instinctively to my still flat stomach. In that moment, the magnitude of my situation hit me with full force. This wasn't just about me anymore, or even about Daniel and his betrayal. There was a new life to consider, an innocent being who deserved better than to be born into a storm of resentment and complicated emotions. I watched them for a few more minutes, these 2 people building a future without any idea that their lives were about to be irrevocably changed. Daniel had made his choice. He had chosen Emma, his past, his first love. But nature had created a bond between us that could never be severed, a truth that would eventually have to come to light. 3 months. He was marrying her in 3 months, and I had no idea how or when to tell him that while he was planning his future with Emma, a part of him would always be tied to me. I pulled myself away from the window before either of them could notice me standing there. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide what was best, not just for me or for Daniel, but for this child who hadn't asked to be born into such a complicated situation. As I walked away, one question echoed in my mind. How long could I keep this secret? And what would happen when the truth finally emerged? The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and morning sickness. My first prenatal visit confirmed what the home test had told me. I was approximately 8 weeks pregnant, with a due date that fell almost exactly 6 months after Daniel and Emma's wedding date. The ultrasound technician pointed out the tiny, flickering heartbeat on the screen, and despite everything, my eyes filled with tears. This was real. This was happening. I told my sister Jen first. She came over with ice cream and a bottle of sparkling cider, ready to continue our regular moving on from Daniel support sessions. When I showed her the ultrasound photo instead of pouring her a glass of wine, her jaw dropped. "Oh my God, Rachel," she whispered. "Does he know?" I shook my head, curling up on the couch with my hands wrapped around a mug of ginger tea. "Not yet. I don't know how to tell him, Jen. He's getting married in less than 3 months." Jen sat beside me, her initial shock giving way to protective anger. "Screw his wedding! He has a responsibility here. This changes everything." "Does it, though?" I asked quietly. "He chose her. Finding out about the baby won't make him love me again or undo what happened." "Maybe not, but he still has a right to know. And this child has a right to a father." She was right, of course. No matter how painful it would be to reinsert myself into Daniel's life, to watch him balance his new beginning with Emma against his obligations to our child, he needed to know. But every time I picked up the phone or drafted an email, something stopped me. Fear, pride, lingering hurt. Perhaps all three. Meanwhile, the pregnancy continued to progress. The exhaustion of the first trimester began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of calm determination. I started taking prenatal yoga classes, researching childcare options, making plans for converting the second bedroom, once Daniel's home office, into a nursery. I found myself talking to the baby when I was alone, promising that no matter how complicated things were with their father, they would always be loved unconditionally by me. At 12 weeks, I had another ultrasound, this one showing a clearly defined profile, tiny nose, rounded forehead, the suggestion of little hands. The technician asked if I wanted to know the sex, if it was visible. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I want to know everything." "You're having a boy," she told me with a smile. "A son. Daniel's son." The knowledge settled in my chest, heavy with implications. In my family's tradition, firstborn sons were often named after their fathers or grandfathers. Would this child carry Daniel's name? Would he inherit his father's easy smile, his talent for making friends wherever he went, his passion for architecture? The thought both warmed and terrified me. That evening, I ran into Mark, the mutual friend who had first introduced Daniel and me, at the grocery store. I hadn't seen him since the breakup, and from his awkward greeting, I could tell he felt caught between loyalties. "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I hesitated, debating whether to share my news, before deciding honesty was simpler. "I'm pregnant, actually. It's Daniel's." Mark's eyes widened. "Does he—" "No," I interrupted. "He doesn't know yet. I'm still figuring out how to tell him." Mark ran a hand over his face. "This is... wow. The wedding's in 6 weeks." The reminder sent a jolt through me. 6 weeks. The time was passing so quickly. I know, I said. Believe me, I know. For what it's worth, Mark said carefully, he's not as happy as he pretends to be. I think he rushed into things with Emma, trying to recapture something from the past. That doesn't really help, Mark, I said, though in a way it did. It shouldn't have mattered to me whether Daniel was truly happy with his choice, but I couldn't help the small, mean part of me that hoped he wasn't. I won't say anything, he promised. But Rachel, you need to tell him soon, before the wedding. I nodded, knowing he was right. The longer I waited, the more complicated everything would become. Daniel deserved to make his commitment to Emma with full knowledge of what else he was committing to. A child, co-parenting with his ex, a lifelong connection to me that would never be fully severed. A week later, I finally gathered the courage to contact Daniel. The text was simple. We need to talk. It's important. Can we meet? His response came quickly. Is everything okay? I can meet tomorrow after work. We arranged to meet at a quiet park near my apartment, neutral territory, public enough to prevent a scene, but private enough for the conversation we needed to have. I arrived early, settling on a bench with a view of the duck pond, rehearsing what I would say. When Daniel approached, I could see the concern on his face. Whatever he had imagined this meeting to be about, he sensed its significance. He sat beside me, keeping a careful distance. You look good, he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. I mean, you look well, healthy. Thanks, I replied, my hand unconsciously moving to my stomach, still not showing much under my loose sweater. How are wedding plans going? He seemed relieved at the mundane question. Hectic. Emma wants everything perfect, and there's still so much to do. I'm sure. I took a deep breath. Daniel, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I'm pregnant. 14 weeks. It happened before you left. The colour drained from his face. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at me, as if waiting for me to tell him this was some cruel joke. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. You're pregnant? With my baby? I nodded, reaching into my bag for the ultrasound photo I'd brought. I handed it to him, watching as he looked at the first image of his son, with an expression of shock and awe. It's a boy, I said softly. Daniel covered his mouth with his hand, still staring at the image. A boy, he repeated, his voice thick. Then he looked up at me, his eyes swimming with confusion and something else, fear maybe, or regret. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I only found out a few weeks ago, I explained, and I needed time to process it myself before I could tell you. I know the timing is complicated. He let out a humourless laugh. Complicated. That's one way to put it. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. What are you planning to do? I'm keeping him, I said firmly. I'm due in early November. Of course, he said quickly. I didn't mean to imply. He trailed off, clearly overwhelmed. Does anyone else know? Just my sister and my doctor. And Mark, I ran into him last week. I paused. I haven't told anyone else. I wanted you to know first before it becomes obvious. Daniel nodded, still looking dazed. Have you thought about what happens next? With us, I mean. How we handle this? I don't expect us to get back together, if that's what you're asking, I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. You've made your choice, and I've accepted that. But this baby is going to need both of us, and I hope we can find a way to co-parent that puts his needs first. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pond. I need to tell Emma, he finally said. I know. This changes everything. I shook my head. It doesn't have to. You can still marry her, still have the life you want. You'll just also be a father to our son." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time since he'd left. "How can you be so calm about this? I left you for another woman, and now you're carrying my child, and you're sitting here telling me I can still have my happy ending with her." "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Anger won't change anything. Bitterness won't make me a better mother. We're going to be connected for the rest of our lives, Daniel. We have to find a way forward that doesn't tear us all apart." He handed the ultrasound photo back to me, his fingers lingering for a moment. "I don't deserve your understanding." "This isn't about what you deserve," I said softly. "It's about what our son deserves." As Daniel walked away, promising to call me after he'd spoken with Emma, I felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The secret was out, the truth exposed, but the real complications were only beginning. How would Emma react? Would their wedding proceed as planned? What would our co-parenting relationship look like in the shadow of their marriage? 3 days passed without word from Daniel. I tried not to obsess about what might be happening, whether Emma had thrown him out or embraced the situation with unlikely grace. On the morning of the 4th day, my doorbell rang. Daniel stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days, holding a small gift bag. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him enter the apartment that had once been ours. He glanced around, taking in the changes I'd made. New throw pillows, rearranged furniture, the beginnings of a nursery visible through the spare room's open door. "I told Emma," he said without preamble, "about the baby." "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. "It was..." He sighed heavily. "Difficult. She's hurt, confused, angry, mostly at me, not at you. She feels like I kept something from her even though I didn't know." "Is the wedding..." "Postponed," he said. "Not cancelled, but postponed indefinitely. We both need time to figure out what this means for us. For all of us." I nodded, unsure what to say. A small, shameful part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt sad for the mess we had all found ourselves in. "I brought something," Daniel said, holding out the gift bag. "For the baby." Inside was a soft, stuffed elephant, grey with floppy ears and a sewn-on smile. "My dad gave me one just like this when I was born," he explained. "It was my favourite thing growing up." The simple gift, this acknowledgement of his role in our child's life, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you." We sat on the couch, the stuffed elephant between us, and began the awkward, necessary process of planning a shared future neither of us had envisioned. Daniel wanted to be involved. Doctor's appointments, birthing classes, decisions about the baby's care. He offered financial support, which I reluctantly accepted. We talked about custody arrangements, holiday schedules, all the practical matters of co-parenting, while trying to dance around the emotional landmines beneath the surface. "I want you to know," Daniel said as he was leaving, "that I'm committed to being a good father. Whatever happens with Emma and me, that won't change." "I believe you," I said, and I did. For all his flaws, for all the pain he had caused me, I had never doubted Daniel's capacity for love and responsibility. It was one of the reasons I had fallen in love with him in the first place. The weeks that followed established a new normal. Daniel came to my 20-week anatomy scan, his face lighting up as we watched our son sucking his thumb on the ultrasound monitor. We started discussing names, narrowing down possibilities without reaching a final decision. He helped me assemble the crib one weekend, the familiar domesticity of the task both comforting and painful. Emma and I met once at her request. It was as awkward as expected, both of us trying to be civil while navigating territory neither of us had ever imagined traversing. She had questions about the pregnancy, about my expectations for Daniel's involvement. I had questions about their relationship status, which remained complicated. Still together, she told me, but reassessing, rebuilding trust, postponing major decisions until after the baby arrived. I never wanted to hurt you," she said as our stilted coffee meeting came to an end. "I know that's hard to believe, but it's true." "I know," I replied, and part of me did understand. Love rarely follows convenient paths or considers collateral damage. We're all just doing our best with an impossible situation. By the time my due date approached, many of the initial raw emotions had settled into something more manageable. Daniel and Emma were still together, still figuring things out, but their wedding remained on hold. Daniel had become a constant presence in my life again, though in a completely different capacity than before. Not as my partner, but as my child's father, supportive, but with clear boundaries that we both respected. My water broke 3 days before my due date in the middle of the night. I called Daniel, as we had agreed, and he arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after the ambulance delivered me. He stayed by my side throughout the 14 hours of labour, holding my hand, coaching me through contractions, witnessing the birth of our son with tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, cradling the tiny bundle in his arms. "He looks like you." "He has your chin," I observed, exhausted but filled with a love so overwhelming it eclipsed everything else. "And your ears." We named him Thomas after my grandfather, a decision Daniel had readily agreed to, knowing how important family connections were to me. As I watched father and son together in those first precious hours, I felt a surprising sense of peace. This wasn't the family I had envisioned, not the life I had planned, but there was beauty in it nonetheless. 6 months later, I sat on a park bench watching Daniel push Thomas in the baby swing, their identical smiles brightening the crisp autumn day. Emma was there too, a tentative but increasingly comfortable presence in our unusual family constellation. Their wedding was back on, scheduled for the following spring, this time with full awareness and acceptance of all the complications their union entailed. I still had moments of sadness, of wondering what might have been if Emma had never returned to Chicago. But those moments grew less frequent, less painful, as I built my new life, a fulfilling career that allowed flexible hours for parenting, a small but dedicated support network, and even a couple of promising first dates with a kind single dad I had met through a parenting group. Life had taken a sharp, unexpected turn, forcing me down a path I never would have chosen. Daniel had left me to pursue his first love, not knowing I was carrying his child. The revelation had changed all of our lives, creating connections where there might have been only endings. It wasn't perfect. Co-parenting rarely is. But we had found our way to something that worked, something that put Thomas's needs at the centre while allowing each of us adults to seek our own versions of happiness. As I watched my son laugh in his father's arms, I realised that sometimes the most painful detours lead us exactly where we need to be. The life I thought Daniel and I would build together had indeed shattered, but from those broken pieces, we had all created something new. Not what any of us had expected, but valuable and real in its own right. Daniel caught my eye across the playground and smiled. Not the smile of a lover, but of a co-parent, a friend, someone navigating the same complicated waters with the same precious cargo. I smiled back, grateful for the peace we had found, for the family we had forged, different as it was from the one I had once imagined. Some bonds, I had learned, truly can't be broken, not the bond of first love that had drawn Daniel back to Emma, and not the unbreakable connection between parents and their child. But from those unbreakable bonds, new possibilities could emerge, new paths forward that none of us could have foreseen. And in that moment, watching my son reach for the sky as his father pushed him higher, I was finally, unexpectedly, content with where those paths had led.